So, welcome, good afternoon, and thank you for coming. Uh, I have the pleasure to introduce you Andrea Righi, who is Associate Professor and Director of Italian Studies at Miami University. His new book, The Other Side of the Digital, The Sacrificial Economy of the New Media, is due out in March at the University of Minnesota Press. He's also the author of Italian Reactionary Thought and Critical Theory and Critical Theory and Social Change in Italy from Gramsci to Pasolini to Negri, both at Palgrave. In 2018, he co-edited with Cesare Casarino Another Mother, The Ultima and the Symbolic Order of Italian Feminism, University of Minnesota. Uh, Dr. Righi's talk today is René Girard's As a Reader of Dante, Testing the Theory of Mimetic Desire. Please join me in welcome Dr. Andrea.
Thank you, Daniele. And as everybody have been up since very early in the morning teaching and standing at the screen, so bear with me. I hope it'll make sense through through these notes that I assembled in the last couple of months, I guess. So let me start from the book that is coming out in March. Basically, the argument in that book, some of you probably know it because I gave another presentation here, but that the book basically makes the argument that transcendence as a form of power that is theological and metaphysical in origin has mutated into a fully secularized economic agent. Okay, and that's what I call neoliberal digitality. That is to say, there's some sort of entity power that attracts us, that compels us to do things for the greater good of that digital dimension itself, in a way. So in a way, when economy was able to get rid of the restrictions of theology, restrictions regarding usury, regarding prohibitions regarding exchanges, prohibition regarding hedonism. When that theological blockage was removed, then economy became a new metaphysics. So it occupied the same place, but completely open to expand itself. Using the word of Walter Benjamin, the new, capitalism is a religion without atonement, without the possibility of redemption, and so it instills guilt and it makes you work for it without any end in sight. Okay, so in that book, however, I pointed to a different direction, the direction that along with others I call immanence. Right. We should struggle for immanence as the right, as at least a better understanding of our life, and probably as a source of political activism and so forth. But as any philosopher knows, you can't simply, abolish one system by imposing another, because that other system would simply replace the former one. So if we declare, and as I did in the book, and I realize now that if we declare, no, well, the true dimension of reality should be immanence, and then immanence actually turns out to be a new transcendence, a new principle that stands outside reality by containing it, by organizing it. But immanence shouldn't be that, right? So how do you get around it? How can you avoid the downfall of simply changing the name for the same oppressive somehow principle that organizes life? Aristides Baltas is a Greek philosopher, wrote a very interesting book called Peeling Potatoes or Grinding Lenses. It's a work on Spinoza and Wittgenstein. He basically articulates this problem and in better terms than I did. And he says that the only solution is to let transcendence implode in itself. So you need to embrace transcendence and then let it unseat itself through the weights of its own contradiction. You can't say God is dead and now it's only mankind, because mankind becomes the new God. Somehow, God has to tell you, I do not exist. This is a Lacanian position as well. But Cesare Zavattini, in a little poem in dialect that I just translated, expresses perfectly this idea. The poem is titled "Maybe, Perhaps," and he says, perhaps the greatest emotion that I had one day was God coming into my bedroom and telling me I do not exist, which is contradictory, of course. But if it's only the other that tells you that he doesn't have a hold on you, can you probably liberate yourself from that? Okay, so that's a big introduction to say that the new research walks this path. I want to assemble a series of authors that think and articulate transcendence to a point in which this principle collapses. Okay, and the first author that I encountered that it's at the beginning of this journey is not the author that would lead me probably at the end, because I argue that he actually end up in a new form of transcendence. He's a believer, and so for him there is a God out there, but he articulates certain concepts, particularly this idea of mimesis and desire and rivalry, that allows us to move the first steps into this direction of deconstructing, unseating transcendence. I decided to use Canto Fifth of Dante as an example, as a sort of testing ground, so that we can maybe explain better, illustrate better his philosophy, the Girard philosophy, but also because I think as in of itself, Canto Fifth creates already some problems to Girard's theory that if it allows us to walk his journey and get to the very end of it, in which these contradictions seems to appear and are not easy to solve within his system. Okay, within his system. So we get started. Canto Fifth, Paolo and Francesca. The essay that Girard writes on Canto Fifth is the opening essay of this important book, To Double Business Bound, which is a big book on literature and anthropology. It talks about Nietzsche, Camus, who has Dostoevsky. So it's one of his testing grounds for his theory of literature as a whole. But he begins with an interesting take on Canto Fifth. His idea is very simple, and it is shared by the majority of contemporary critics regarding the love relationship, the famous love relationship between Paolo and Francesca. We are just concentrating on the last part of the canto. It is a way to read the famous speech that Francesca gives to Dante that demolishes our initial approach to this speech, and it's also the approach that our students usually have. Like you hear Francesca telling this incredible story of passion and tragedy, and you sympathize with her, right? So the reaction of the student is usually, "Oh, it's so beautiful, it's great, they are together for eternity." The problem is they have to get a fraternity in hell, right? So we always have to reinstate, yes, it's true, they are together, but they are actually in hell, right? And so why is that? Why is that? No, that is a very understandable and even almost justify interpretation of the Kant. Why? Because there were generations of critics, romantic critics, who brought into focus the heroic dimension of Francesca going against this tragic destiny, and thus forgot to also highlight the more figural interpretation of these two characters. What do I mean by that? An important Italian scholar like Giorgio Barberi Scuorotti argues that, and here I translate, in this, in the story of Paolo and Francesca, Dante represents the two characters in their criminal exemplarity, which is that of those who committed sin of adultery by acting upon the sublime literature of the sweet new style and courtly love romance. Okay, so they are not, Squarotti says, they are not actually character in the modern sense of the term. They don't have an interiority based on a certain will, a certain authenticity almost, because they are simply there for the example they set for the readers. Okay, they are, the medieval term for this, they are exemplar. They are a moral function. They are a moral function for us to learn. And learn the big lessons. That is to say, we have free will, we have reason. We need always to use reason and not subject ourselves to carnal passion. Okay. And Girard shares, without citing, without quoting Squarotti, but Girard is perfectly in line with this idea. And he says that he's critiquing the interpretations that are contrary to the spirit of the Divine Comedy. For Dante, hell is a reality. No true union is possible between the disembodied doubles that Paolo and Francesca represent for each other. Now, here's in quick counter the first important word, doubles. They are a double. The title of this essay, in fact, is the mimetic desire of Paolo and Francesca. So here, this title is already interesting because this mimetic desire it can be of various things. It could be of Paolo and Francesca as the story. So there is an imitation of the story of Paolo and Francesca, taking it together. It could be, however, it could be also the imitation of desire of Paolo and of Francesca. And maybe those are different. So I'm going to play around these. I'm going to try to read through these levels of interpretation to show that mimesis for Girard here means different things. The first of these interpretations, or the first level of interpretation, is of course that it's the story of Paolo and Francesca that offers a model for understanding how love works. And this model comes from, as what Squarotti said, from the courtly love tradition. That is to say, as you probably know, it's a very famous part of the canto. Francesca and Paolo fall in love or realize their love reading the famous courtly love romance, Lancelot and Guinevere, right? Or Lancelot du Lac, as Dante was probably reading the French version of it. So by reading the example of the two famous lovers, says Girard, they understand their own desire. This means that their own desire is not their own. They desire each other because they have an example set before their eyes of two important people, and they want to imitate that desire. Here, this is why Girard is interested in this canto. Desire, we think that desire is the most private and authentic of our emotions because it must come from us. And Girard says, no, look, in this, and this is a clear case, but it works for every case. We understand that desire is never immediate, is always mediated, is always constructed through a modeling system that belongs to some other. Here you can see the notion of transcendence. There's some other that desires, and we desire what the other desires. Okay, so Paolo reads about Lancelot, and who doesn't want to be Lancelot? But Lancelot, you need your princess, and there she is. You got Francesca here. So they fall madly in love. The point is that desire is always mimetic, and desire is always mimetic. Let me read the definition, but now it gets a little bit more complicated into how desire is mimetic. Let me read a good definition that Girard has in this essay that sort of reveals many of these elements. And again, I'm not keeping track of time, so Daniela, let me know when we have to close. All right, so he says desiring mimesis engenders its objects, but nevertheless it always appears to the outside observer as a triangular configuration, the angles of which are occupied respectively by the two rivals in their common object. The object always comes to the foreground, and mimesis is hidden behind it, even in the eyes of the desiring subject. What is he saying here? He's saying what I was trying to articulate before, that you actually desire through the other is it's a classical triangular situation. So at the vertex you have this other who's a model, and you enter in a competition with that model, and how you do you do it? You desire what the other has, what the other desires. You even more than that, you desire because it's the model who has it or who desires it. So if you see that this authority, this great noble person you admire so much, it's usually a question of rank here. So the higher ranking person desires something, you yourself are attracted by it, and you enter in this competition. So the object of desire is a phantasmatic entity. It's not a real object. It is always something reflected by the volition of this other capital O entity. And then Girard continues: the convergence of desire defines the object. The convergence of desires. The convergence of desire defines the object, because in the rivalry, in the competition that you have, even the higher ranking entity gets his desire reinforced by the fact that this other person desires what he desires too, or what he has too. So value increases because of the motion that the two entity, and we'll say masculine entity, always have. So how would it work here? Again, to repeat, how would it work in the famous Canto Fifth, when Paolo and Francesca gets together in the room by themselves? They read the book. What the book is the model. Both look at the model. They see the model of love that is expressed, this desire for carnal passion, which is adulterous, and that at that point, according to Girard, they desire that same adultery, and they are there, and so that's who they become the desirable object for each other. Girard always says that this desire applies to the feminine and to the masculine. We'll see that this is, I think, it's a major problem in his theory. Very good. I think this is clear. But here is a problem. But of course, they are in hell. And so Girard says that mimetic desire, as a second-hand desire, as a surrogate desire, a second-hand desire, always moves towards nothingness and death. Nothingness and death. Nothingness, we can understand it because you actually become aware of the emptiness of your own selfhood, of your own personhood, because you're basically simply imitating what somebody else has done. Death perhaps is a little bit more difficult. We have to get to another point here to explain it. But for Girard, the point is the following at the end of the essay, which concludes very rapidly, because it basically these are the key points. Desire is mimetic. Paul and Francesca use the model of the courtly love tradition to initiate their love affair, but this desire, this mimetic, leads to death. This is dangerous. Is again in the line of what we said before, following Squarotti. It is morally dangerous. Okay, and so all this literature serves us as a moral example that makes understand how mimetic desire is bad, is negative. This is the Christian, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. This is the Christian revelation. Christian revelation is a moment of, again, transcendence, I believe, where you are able to extricate outside from this network of desire, and you realize that everything that you did before was wrong. Therefore, the new life appears. We don't know what this new life, and he never really explains it, but the new life somehow appears precisely in the retrospective understanding of everything that has happened before, right? It's the conversion. It's basically Saint Augustine in the Confession, understanding the sinful life that he led before. Now, so I'm giving you some tidbits here regarding why mimetic desire is bad, but it's still hard to completely understand why. We have to move to another element of this theory that involves violence. Now we're going to link mimetic desire to violence, and at that point, I think a lot of things will become clearer. What is the connection here? Well, let me give you an example so make it short. Apparently, his theory of mimetic desire happened during a meeting in his department at Stanford, where he realized that all the infighting of the department was going on because one person, probably of higher rank, had something that everybody desired because that person had. Okay, so these are things that can happen at Stanford. We're very lucky we don't have to fight for. It's a democratizing way that Miami grants us. There's very little to desire. So we are all in the same, as we say in Italy, we are all in the same boat. We're all equals. There's little we can covet from each other. But for Girard, this is the point. And let's complicate it a little bit. The triangular dimension means that the two competing entities are competing for the same thing, right? And so there's a rivalry that increases, and in societies in general, like in the department, this rivalry brings conflict and creates problem because it creates an environment that is not harmonious anymore, and it cannot function properly. At this point, societies, since the beginning of time, had to come up with solutions. We can call them technologies to avoid stalemates or, even worse, open violent conflict, okay, where people start to injure each other and then escalate into bloody war, escalate into what is called usually the blood feud. What are these technologies? The technology that is at the basis of all human groups is called sacrifice. Is the sacrifice of a victim, that assumes upon itself all the blames that the tension of that society is creating. So the group, and this happens continuously, the group would find a scapegoat, that is to say, somebody who's to blame, and it doesn't have to be guilty. They have to believe that he is guilty. A scapegoat that receives all the blame for the conflict that the desires of that community has, and that cannot be satisfied, and that it is leading to injuries and to problems. At that point, when that scapegoat is selected, it must be sacrificed through a series of rituals that establish him as a sort of receptacle for a punishment, a divine punishment. The sacrifice of that person, or then it would be animals and so forth, would miraculously then reestablish harmony in the group. So this is Girard has a different definition of the sacred. The sacred sometimes is understood as what is indistinct, is the natural amorphous dimension that is dangerous. For Girard, the sacred is sameness. The fact that we desire the same thing because we have a model that we follow. you can see how my mimetic desire now becomes very troubling, because it's the channeling of all these energies and volitions toward one object that then cannot satisfy the group, produces conflict, and then a violence. And at that point, you need to find a scapegoat to reinstitute a kind of peace and harmony, to avoid the blood feud. So, the case of Oedipus, he has to be. It's very simple. Oedipus becomes the sacrificial element that, by being ostracized, you don't have to. You have to. Violence is not just physical violence. It could be accusation. It can be, expulsion from the city. By finding that him as guilty of something that has happened, incest, whatever, then the plague is miraculously dissolved, and Thebes can go on with business as usual. And again, the important point is that the group must believe that the victim is actually guilty of something. Okay, if it's true or not, we don't. It doesn't matter, as long as the group believes in the fact that they found the culprit, then the sacrificial mechanism can function. Okay. Let me say also something about the blood feud. Girard is I think he does a good job in understanding how it works. Like he says, the problem with the violence, the injuries, is that, and the blood feud, is that you don't understand at a certain point, or from the beginning, you don't understand what is an action and what is a reaction. What is the vendetta and what is the actual initial act? Because one act always calls for a response that escalates, and you don't know anymore what balance you can find. The balance is precisely in stopping the blood feud through the mechanism of sacrificial. This is a sacrificial economy. Okay. But again, I want to reinstate that the scapegoat mechanism works only if it's hidden. Nobody understands what it is. Particularly because he says usually human people have some restraints in using violence. Religion, instead, in the ritualistic dimension, built on sacrifice, works very well because it allows humans to dispose of violence and thus solve interfighting in a way that is neutral, in a way that is legitimate. So the sacrifice of the victim is perfectly legitimate. You have the gods on your side. You've solved the problems for the community. Things must be done according to a ritual, but and that the ritual means the connection with the other of transcendence. Once that is done, hopefully harmony will be reinstated. Now, for Girard, all human groups and old religions, ancient religions mostly, they are based on a sacrificial mechanism that humanizes them, that keeps them alive as human groups. Girard can be, I think we can acknowledge, it goes to his merit to have understood the inherent, not evil, but violent nature of these ritualistic mechanisms, okay, of societies. Which are hidden, and they're not evil. That's the real thing. It doesn't have to be something bad. It is actually something good that you do for your society. Now, things changes with Christianism. Why? I mean, already with the Bible, with the Old Testament, Girard takes a lot of work to argue that there is no real sacrificial economy in the Old Testament, which again, like it's so full of killing. But anyway, he always says that even if there's a sacrifice, the God of the Judeo-Christian tradition is the God that is on the side of the victim. He's always the God that is on the side of the underdog. First the Jews, then the Christian. It's again debatable point, but we'll take it for what it is. Let me now move into why Christianism, however, it's really Christianism that changes everything. Why Christianism changes everything? Well, because Christianism finally reveals how the scapegoat mechanism works. It reveals the scapegoat mechanism for what it actually is. And by revealing it, it disables it. It reveals mimetic violence and thus abolishes it, says Girard. How does it reveal it? Okay, let me quote Girard here. The Gospels bear testimony to this truly divine revelation. Under the influence of the Spirit, the disciples perpetuated a memory of the event, not in the mythic form that ought to have triumphed once again, but in a form that reveals the innocence of the just man who has suffered martyrdom. Mythic violence believes in the guiltiness of the victim, must believe in that to make it happen, and so legitimize the violence. Whereas Christianism, for the first time, says, no, the victim is innocent. The victim is innocent. Thus, they avoid, Girard says, they avoided sacralizing the victim as the guilty party and prevented him from being held responsible for the purely human disorders that his death was supposed to end. So, again, this is a very interesting rereading of the crucifixion, because if you go to Bible school, the first thing you learn is that that Jesus died for us to redeem the corruption of Adam, of Adamitic mankind, right? And his blood, and this is the part that I like to elaborate more in the book. The blood is the currency. The blood is the super currency that we use for this redemption. The blood spilled by God is the down payment for freeing us from being guilty, from being sinner. Now, then it's up to us. Then it's up to us to walk in the footprints of Jesus and do right things, and not to need the intervention again, some sort of intervention, another payment that says, okay, you're free again, right? So this is a sacrificial economy, completely sacrificial economy. This I do something in order for something else to happen, right? Well, Girard says that that's not exactly the case. There are some. This tradition comes from a misreading of the Gospels, particularly certain parts of the Gospel that talks about blood. The idea instead is that the message that Jesus delivers is that mimetic desire and its violence is bad. We should refrain from that. We should love our enemy, and so we should never we should love our enemy, and we should not follow the mimetic desire of the other, because it leads to violence. So it's not even a quid pro quo. Jesus arrived. He was divine. Why? That's the point. So he was divine because he showed something that never happened before on earth: loving your enemy. Before, all religions created the sacred, the divine, through sacrifice. That's how we create the sacred, through sacrifice, right? But this sacrifice is the killing or the aggression or the violence to the other. The innovation, the revelation is love the other, destroy what? And that means destroy my mimetic desire, avoid mimetic desire, and avoid the necessary solution, the targeted violence that reestablishes some sort of order for the time being. Okay, so back to Canto Fifth. How can we use these ideas to better understand, or maybe to deconstruct some part of this argument? I remember I was telling you there's a literary level of my mimetic desire, which is the courtly love tradition. And I explained how both Paolo and Francesca desire through that model, and then they sin. But and here Girard should have been a little bit more, careful. But there's also an historical dimension. The story, the history of Francesca and Paolo as it is, because that is completely, again, it could be read through Girard, which he doesn't, but we'll do it for him. It could be read through the triangle of desire. What is the story? Probably you know it. So Francesca marries Paolo's brother, the Lord of Rimini, Gianciotto, who is a violent man of action, violent man, probably crippled too. Paolo is the younger brother, beautiful, cultured, but not a man of action. Teodolinda Barolini calls him a lightweight, with a Trumpian expression, a lightweight dandy. He's a lightweight dandy. So what do you have? You have again the triangle, like Paolo desiring what his brother has, decides to win over Francesca by defeating Paolo on the turf that he prefers, which is literature, sensibility, beauty, right? So we can read in this sense the triangle, particularly because Girard seems to go in that direction when he says, a Paolo who encountered Lancelot every day would no doubt prefer Queen Guinevere to Francesca and his rival, making the rival desire her so as to desire her the more himself, to desire her through him, or rather against him, to tear her in short from a desire that transfigures her. So Paolo is so much into this position of trying to become the higher rank in the family that if he would see actually Lancelot, not the princess, not Guinevere, but Lancelot, by seeing Lancelot, he would start to take Lancelot, not Gianciotto, who is a Malatesta, an important lord, but not as noble, as important as Lancelot. If he would see Lancelot, he would start to desire Guinevere, not because of her, but because of Lancelot. Okay. Now, is there a scapegoat in this system? Because so far we have mimetic desire, but is there a scapegoat? Girard doesn't say, but I mean, it is pretty clear because Francesca and Paolo, they get killed by Gianciotto, right? And in a way, we can say that Francesca is, I think, the scapegoat, the sacrificial victim in this. And why is she the sacrificial victim? Again, we have to look at the history that we know. There's very little information regarding Francesca, but Francesca, as it happened at the time, was married to Gianciotto to make an alliance between two competing families. The Malatesta were the lords of Rimini, and the Polenta were the lords of Ravenna. And so they established an agreement through marrying the beautiful young Francesca to the ugly old Gianciotto, right? So she served as, this is Teodolinda Barolini, again, she says, Francesca served as a dynastic function, okay? In the potential blood feud between the two houses, she is what is sacrificed to stop the blood feud, okay? To prevent the blood feud to escalate or to begin. Unfortunately, this does not work very much as it sometimes happens, and she's killed too. But that's very interesting. There's no consequence for Gianciotto. It's not the blood feud that does not escalate. The Polenta do not take revenge. Gianciotto remarries later on, and Francesca is forgotten in history. So Francesca is really a sort of homo sacer, that is to say, those who can be killed with impunity, who can be sacrificed, right? And here we get to the part that Girard does not look at much. But Francesca, she testifies to her innocence. She never says, I was wrong. Like, I loved them, love seized me, and I got killed. So I am innocent. I am an innocent victim for what has happened. It's a very ambiguous situation here, because we are getting close to the Christological situation of an innocent victim who who exposes some truth in the blood feud that rules society at the time. Now, okay, so this is the point about maybe Francesca being almost being a scapegoat and almost being a Christological figure because she's also innocent. Although, of course, the point that both Barberis Corotti and Girard would make is that she believes she's innocent, but for society, she is guilty, because she did not obey intellect and she did not refrain from following those carnal passions, right? So it's the whole story. She could be a scapegoat, a sacrificial victim, but society knows that is guilty and she functions, and that's precisely how she functions. It prevents the blood feud because it's not revealed as something artificial. It's not revealed as it's not revealed as what Christianism says, as a mechanism that is artificial and that does not lead to any durable peace. But again, we need to read the text here, and we have to pay attention to what happens to the story that the Francesca is telling in this very beautiful but very poetic sentences that are very dense and difficult to untangle. First of all, we never ask what Francesca's desire is. We know Paolo's desire could be pretty clear. Paolo also never speaks in the canto. Paolo weeps only. So we don't know. I mean, is he weeping because he's been punished, or is he weeping because, oh my God, look what I did by following wanting to become better than my brother but it's only Francesca who talks, and it's only her voice that we hear. But what about her desire? Well, that's the testimony that she brings. Her desire. What is her desire? First of all, she presents Paolo by addressing him as bella figura, beautiful figure. Now, it cannot be. She's not introducing him because they are together in some Caribbean island and they're happy there. He's a tortured soul. He cannot be a bella figura. She must be referring. Other scholars say this. She must be referring to him at the beginning, and that's why she got interested in him. A beautiful human being. Second part is that she's not the one who starts the thing. She's not the one who falls in love immediately. It's Paolo who's seized by love, probably because, again, the mimetic desire. But and then she has to respond to it. So first of all, she becomes an object of love. She becomes the desirable thing. She doesn't have that active pursuit that pushes her into rivalry, because she's in this passive position of being desired. And then she reciprocates. Now here, pages and pages about the famous line, amor que nulla mata, amor perdona, love that does not excuse somebody to be loved to reciprocate, which a lot of people, accepted all sorts of explanations, right? One explanation would be, well, if love is so powerful, if somebody loves you, you have to respond. And here, Barberis Corotti is very important because he goes into a series of analysis where he draws on the De Amore by Cappellano to trace the origin of this sentence, and he argues in the end that it is a mistake. Dante, the genius of Dante, the philosopher Dante, could have never supported a statement that says that if you're loved, then you have to love back. You are justifying what? Submission. Which is even worse than arranged marriage. In an arranged marriage, sure, that was society, that's how it works. You don't have to love your husband, but you have to engage in that marriage and political alliance. But nobody would actually be, would be saying that you have to love that person. So it cannot be what Dante is saying, right? It would probably Dante is saying is that once you are subjected to the force of love, you have to follow it. There's nothing you can do about it. And that's why she's claiming to be innocent. In English, we understand very well this sentence. You fall in love. You fall in love. You do not decide. You cannot decide who you're going to love in a sentimental way. Something has to seize you. Some powerful force has to inhabitate you so that you can respond, right? And then, so so there's no mimesis here. There's no rivalry. There's no, really no rivalry, because the moment in which maybe there's a connection with Guinevere is when she's already in this situation, and the book simply enables her to understand what is happening. It gives her a model for what? It's not rivalry, because she's not out there to best the queen of the Breton tales. The model actually illustrates how she can assert herself against the dynastic function which she's assigned as a woman in those times. It's the moment in which she can liberate herself from being exactly a scapegoat, being exactly a sacrificial entity that intervenes so that the male agents can stop fighting for the same thing and block the blood feud that is ensuing. I think this is a different. I think she revealed. So she again, I'm forced almost to read it in a Christian way. Like she's forced to. She reveals the mimetic desire that produces the scapegoat, which she is, and she fights against it because she picks Paolo against the wife that she was supposed to be, in a way, and then she pays the price. She pays the price for that. I think it's a mimesis without rivalry, and it is also a relationship. Again, to go back to the beginning, it's a relationship with the other of love, that is more constructive, that at least has a goal. The goal is to fight against an oppressive system, which she's part of. So she obeys the incredible force of love, but not to reinstate the same situation, but actually to go against it, to go against this game between males. And again, I didn't have time to go there. I want to close now to leave it open for discussion. But I think one of the best critiques of René Girard theory of desire comes from feminism, where they show that yes, this mimetic desire works really well, but it's a masculine, phallic, patriarchal form of desire, which works very much along these lines. But it does not assess other forms of desires. That's the problem. Girard sometimes is accused of reducing everything to this game, triangular game. The problem is not that. The problem is that we can try to use desire to explain a lot of what happens in society and how human groups come together. Another word for desire is economy. What is an economy? Economy is the way to manage the desires that each of us has, right? But the desire that he always, with an incredible force and is unrelentless in repeating it and finding everywhere, is the desire of a phallic masculine entity which does not even care about the object of desire, is simply chasing and fighting, a game, like it's a race with some other who he needs to defeat somehow, or to show that he's better than. Okay,